One of the other things we find in the Middle East that is unusual is a relatively high degree of secondary and tertiary education. Partly financed in some cases by oil, but in other cases by foreign assistance. In Tunisia, Egypt, Libya, Syria, Jordan, the number of high school graduates and people who have enrolled and have some college education has grown very dramatically. It's generally tripled or quadrupled in the last 25 years. But the quality of this education has not been very good. And therefore, many of these people are not readily employable. And so unemployment has been extremely high among people who considered themselves to have earned a better position. Now, part of the reason so many people enrolled in universities is that for a long time, the governments of Tunisia, Egypt, would guarantee a job to university graduates. So they weren't so much going to college to learn a skill that they could then vend on the market. They were going to college to get a certificate that would entitle them to a secure position. But that entitlement was withdrawn in recent years because the kind of IMF Washington consensus on governments was you want to encourage foreign investment. You don't want to subsidize graduates. You don't want to subsidize fuel consumption. You don't want to spend so much on government spending. And so these economies, which had developed a momentum of trying to prepare educated students for secure government positions, had instead, in the last 5 years, been shifting very dramatically to encouraging foreign investment, corporate growth. This looked good at the top line in terms of GDP increases. It also provided great opportunities for members of the government and their supporters to cash in by becoming involved in these contracts for foreign investment operations involving heavy industry, corporate growth. So the students who had hoped they would do well were left out, but they saw these concentrations of growing wealth in the finance and industrial sector. The other thing we know about revolution and revolt is there's an emotional component. It is fueled not just by a sense of unhappiness or despair about bad conditions. Also critical is a sense of outrage at injustice, a sense of unfairness, a loss of dignity. And revolt is in many ways an effort to recover dignity and make claims for the significance and importance of the people who are protesting and feel they've been neglected. Now, these might even be well-educated people if they feel they've been unfairly shut out of a decent job, or it might be people who are just unemployed youth who have been struggling. The youth unemployment in the Middle East and North Africa was about 24%. I don't know whether that's high or low, but I was surprised to see that that's actually twice the global average for unemployment in the 15 to 29 age group. It was reported by the International Labor Organization in the most recent 2010 report. And in Egypt, unemployment among recent college graduates was even higher. It was about 50%. So it's a strange situation where unemployment is higher in countries that had invested more in education. But again, this was because of the state orientation and the poor quality of what was offered. So you had this unusual collision of high youth unemployment, high frustration among the educated, concern that the visible benefits of increasing foreign investment, growth of the private sector, corporate growth were not trickling down at all. Indeed, the number of people in Egypt who were reported as living on $2 a day or less had remained a fairly consistent 35 to 40% for the last 15 years. This despite the growth in GDP. And the Pew World Trust, which does a lot of surveys in the developing world, had done a survey in Egypt where they asked people in different income levels, how well are you doing? Would you describe your condition as thriving, doing well, doing okay, or doing poorly? And they were actually surprised to find out that only the very top income group reported themselves as thriving, but about 80% of the population reported themselves as doing fair or doing poorly. Very odd for a country that, according to the World Bank, had seen stable 5% GDP growth for the last 10 years, since the mid-90s. So there's clearly a disconnect going on in these countries. What looked superficially like economies that were open to global investment, increasing foreign direct investment, increasing corporate profits, increasing private sector, increasing overall GDP growth, it somehow wasn't benefiting the population.